What if the global chessboard is, well, more volatile than ever? So much so that it demands a complete rethink of America's defense strategy. Today, we're diving deep into Russia's aggressive global actions and looking at a proposed conservative blueprint for U.S. national security. Our mission, really, is to unpack how Russia fuels instability, from the Arctic all the way down to the Mediterranean. They're using military might, cyber warfare, even energy as a weapon. And then we'll explore a potential strategic response, one that tries to prioritize America's core interests while at the same time empowering our allies. You're basically about to get a shortcut to understanding the next evolution of global power dynamics.
And it's crucial because, as our sources show, these threats are becoming incredibly complex, very unconventional. Just take the destruction of the Nord Stream pipelines back in 2022.
Right.
That wasn't just, a pipeline blowing up. It felt like a masterclass in deniable warfare.
How so?
Well, Russia had actually offered to resume gas shipments, but only if sanctions were lifted. So the timing was interesting. And then the incident itself, it immediately raised huge questions. Some reports even pointed towards, believe it or not, a Ukrainian military officer being linked to the sabotage.
Yeah, I remember that. But wasn't there also talk about other possibilities? It seemed murky.
Exactly. That's the complexity. While some reports pointed one way, other analyses suggested it might have been a strategic move designed to prevent Germany from maybe softening its stance on Russia, keep the pressure on.
Ah, okay.
So it wasn't this clear-cut act of war you could easily pin down. It was this shadowy blow to critical energy infrastructure. And that fundamentally challenges traditional ideas about deterrence. And let's not forget, Russia itself has a history here. They've been accused plenty of times of destabilizing energy markets using cyberattacks and, well, information warfare.
So this Nord Stream thing, it's like a symptom of a bigger pattern, maybe?
I think that's exactly right. What's really striking when you look at the sources is Russia's consistent, multifaceted approach. They seem dedicated to creating instability. Nord Stream was dramatic, sure, but it's far from isolated. I mean, our sources detail their occupation of parts of Georgia back in 2008. That's still ongoing.
Right, South Ossetia and Abkhazia?
Precisely. And their continued military presence in Armenia. And then fast forward to March 2023, the really unsettling announcement about deploying tactical nuclear weapons to Belarus.
What violates key treaties, doesn't it?
Directly violates them. Yeah, so these aren't just random actions. When you put them together, you see a clear pattern of assortive, often escalatory geopolitical maneuvering.
And it's not just the obvious military stuff either, right? Like tanks and troops?
No, not at all. Their military exercises in the past, for instance, have sometimes been used to mask real operational movements. We saw that tactic play out right before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. And beyond that, you've got the cyber domain. State-sponsored cyber attacks hitting critical infrastructure globally. We're talking U.S. government agencies, defense, treasury, homeland security.
Wow.
Even private giants like Microsoft have been targeted. And this isn't just, stealing data for espionage, though that happens. It's often about disruption. It's used as a strategic weapon to destabilize.
That's a staggering reach. And our sources really paint a picture of how Russia actively tries to stir things up across huge geographical areas. You mentioned the Arctic earlier.
Yeah, the Arctic is a big one. They've established, I think the number is 14 operational airfields and 16 deep water ports up there.
That's a lot of infrastructure.
It is. And it's not just infrastructure for infrastructure's sake. These are strategic choke points. Yeah. They position Russia to project power, to challenge resource claims in the Arctic as it opens up. Then you look south towards the Baltics, Ukraine, the South Caucasus areas Russia often refers to as its natural sphere of influence.
Right.
And they've even gone as far as signing these so-called integration treaties with occupied regions like South Ossetia and Georgia. Many see those as steps towards outright annexation.
And connecting this even further out, their influence goes into the Mediterranean too.
Definitely. They've expanded their naval facility in Tartus, Syria. They've secured air base access agreements with Egypt. And then there's the use of paramilitary groups like the Wagner Group, which operated heavily in Libya.
Wagner.
They used Libya almost as a forward base for activities deeper into Africa, particularly the Sahel region. So you see, it's not just about dominating their immediate neighborhood. It really points towards a global ambition, leveraging proxy forces, maintaining influence. And this is even as their conventional military took significant hits in Ukraine. Some reports suggested incredibly high casualty rates, like 90-95% in certain elite Spetsnaz units.
That's almost unbelievable, 90-95%.
It's a devastating number. And it certainly highlights a critical erosion of some of their best forces. It definitely raises questions about their long-term conventional fighting ability, even as they work to rebuild.
But they are rebuilding, right? Despite those losses.
Oh, yes. The spending shows it. Russia spent roughly $86.4 billion on its military in 2022 alone. That's a significant jump, about 9.2% higher than the average of the 2 years before that. So the investment is there. They are actively rebuilding and adapting.
Okay, so you have this picture of persistent, adaptable Russian aggression across multiple domains: military, cyber, energy, proxies. And then you have the reality that America's resources, well, they aren't infinite. We can't be everywhere doing everything all the time. So the urgent question becomes, how do we adapt our strategy?
Exactly. And this is where this concept, this strategic framework called the prioritization imperative, comes into the discussion. It's presented as a potential answer, coming from a more conservative policy perspective. It proposes a really fundamental shift in how the U.S. approaches national security.
The fundamental shift, how?
Well, its core premise is acknowledging that America's military power and, crucially, its financial resources are limited. That sounds obvious, maybe, but it's actually a stark departure from some past foreign policy thinking that seemed, well, less constrained.
Okay, limited resources. Makes sense. So what does this mean in practice? What does this prioritization imperative suggest we actually do, especially thinking about our global commitments, our allies?
Right, that's the key question for you, the listener, to consider. The strategy basically argues for America to focus its primary efforts and resources on two main things: defending the U.S. homeland itself and deterring China. Deterring China, specifically, preventing a potential Chinese invasion of Taiwan, is highlighted as a top priority.
Defend the homeland, deter China. What else?
It also places a really strong emphasis on securing U.S. borders against illegal immigration. This framework explicitly views large-scale illegal immigration not just as a social or economic issue, but as a significant national security threat.
How so, from a national security perspective?
The argument presented is the potential for espionage, for adversaries to potentially infiltrate the country through migration flows. And it suggests that the Department of Defense actually has a vital role to play in supporting border security efforts, mainly through things like surveillance and intelligence gathering.
Okay, homeland defense, deterring China, border security, that sounds very focused inward, or maybe towards the Pacific. What about Europe? What about Russia, which we just spent all this time describing as a major aggressor?
That's the potential point of criticism, isn't it? If the U.S. scales back its conventional forces in Europe, does that create a vacuum? Does it embolden Russia or other potential adversaries?
Yeah, exactly. How does this blueprint address that risk? Does it just say, Europe, you're on your own?
Not entirely, but it calls for a significant shift in responsibility. The prioritization imperative suggests that while the U.S. would absolutely maintain its nuclear umbrella, the extended nuclear deterrent over Europe, and keep some conventional forces there, the primary responsibility for conventional defense against threats like Russia should transition to our European NATO allies.
So a call for NATO allies to step up.
A very clear call. It points out quite directly that many allies have historically fallen short of their defense spending commitments, like the 2% of GDP target. The implication is it's time to genuinely meet those commitments and take the lead in conventional deterrence on the continent.
And what about other regions? The Middle East, for example.
A similar logic applies. The U.S. would continue to strongly support key allies, particularly Israel's defense. But the types of forces deployed might change. The focus might shift more towards using, say, fourth-generation aircraft and shorter-range weapons systems, rather than dedicating the most advanced, long-range assets needed for a potential conflict in the Pacific, specifically over Taiwan. It's about making, well, hard choices, a realistic, maybe even ruthless rebalancing of resources based on these defined priorities.
So prioritize China, ask allies in Europe and elsewhere to carry more of the conventional load, secure the border. What else does this framework entail?
A major push for modernizing the U.S. military, specifically for this new era where China is explicitly named as the pacing threat.
Meaning the benchmark we measure our own capabilities against?
Exactly. This involves practical steps, like surging production of key munitions, think long-range anti-ship missiles, things vital in a Pacific scenario. It also means accelerating the hardening and dispersal of U.S. bases and operating locations in the Western Pacific, making them less vulnerable. And expanding technology cooperation with key regional allies like Japan, South Korea, Australia, maybe even India, leveraging their own unique technological strengths.
Okay, so let's try to recap. We've talked about Russia's actions, persistent, aggressive, using all sorts of tools from pipelines to cyber attacks, from Georgia to Syria.
Right, a complex and ongoing challenge.
And then we've introduced this proposed strategic response, the prioritization imperative. It advocates for the U.S. to really narrow its focus, defend the homeland, deter China above all, secure the border. And as part of that, transition the primary responsibility for conventional defense in Europe to NATO allies while modernizing our own forces with China in mind.
That captures the essence of it, yes.
Good.
A significant potential shift in American grand strategy.
So, considering just how widespread Russia's destabilizing actions are and how radical this proposed shift in U.S. focus would be, it leaves us with some big questions. How do we, maybe as a global community, navigate an era where a major power like the U.S. explicitly says our top priorities are here, at home, and over there with China?
It's a tough question.
What does empowering allies truly look like in practice when the U.S. is consciously pulling back its conventional leadership role in places like Europe? And maybe most importantly, what are the unforeseen consequences? Could this kind of dramatic reprioritization actually upset the fragile balance of global security in ways we haven't even considered?
Those are the critical questions. What happens in the spaces where U.S. focus potentially recedes? Do allies truly fill the gap? Do adversaries see opportunity? There are no easy answers.
Definitely something for you, our listeners, to think about. How do you balance protecting immediate national interests with fostering collective global security? A tough needle to thread. We'll leave you with that thought until next time.